What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected actors walks into what should be a friendly late-night talk show only to discover the host has an agenda that goes way beyond entertainment? It only took 37 seconds of Stephen Colbert's opening question for Samuel L. Jackson to realize this wasn't going to be the typical promotional interview he signed up for. What started as casual banter quickly spiraled into television history's most shocking celebrity walkout, leaving audiences stunned and a talk show host scrambling to save face. Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below with your thoughts on what you're about to hear. Trust me, you're going to want to share your reaction to this one. The Late Show studio buzzed with its usual energy that Tuesday evening. The audience was pumped, the cameras were rolling, and Samuel L. Jackson had just settled into the guest chair with his characteristic cool confidence. He'd done hundreds of these interviews over his decades-long career. This should have been easy. Stephen Colbert walked out with his trademark grin, waving to the crowd as applause filled the studio. The energy felt normal, even friendly. Jackson smiled and nodded as Colbert approached his desk, straightening his tie and shuffling through his note cards with what seemed like nervous excitement. "Welcome back to The Late Show. I'm Stephen Colbert," he announced to the cameras, his voice carrying that familiar late-night host charm. "Tonight, we have the incredible Samuel L. Jackson with us, fresh off his latest blockbuster." The audience erupted in cheers as the camera panned to Jackson, who raised his hand in a modest wave. He looked relaxed, even pleased to be there. After all, he was there to promote his new film, connect with fans, and have some laughs. Standard operating procedure. "Samuel, thanks for being here tonight," Colbert said, settling behind his desk with that practiced ease all talk show host master. "How are you feeling?" "I'm doing great, Stephen. Thanks for having me," Jackson replied, his voice warm and genuine. "Always good to be here in New York." "Now, before we get into your new movie, I have to ask you about something that's been on my mind," Colbert said, and there was something different in his tone now. The friendly warmth had shifted just slightly. "You've been in this business for a very long time." Jackson nodded, still smiling, but perhaps sensing the subtle change in atmosphere. "That's right. Been blessed to work in this industry for many years, and in all those years, you've played a lot of different characters," Colbert continued, leaning forward slightly. "But I'm curious about the real Samuel L. Jackson, the man behind all those tough guy roles." "Well, what would you like to know?" Jackson asked, maintaining his professional demeanor, but clearly wondering where this was heading. Cor shuffled his cards again, and his smile took on a different quality, less warm, more calculated. "I guess what I'm really wondering is, do you ever get tired of being typecast? I mean, let's be honest, you pretty much play the same character in every movie, don't you?" The studio audience shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't the playful ribbing that usually characterized late-night interviews. There was an edge to Colbert's voice that felt more like an attack than a joke. Jackson's smile faltered just slightly, but he kept his composure. "I think that's a pretty unfair characterization, Stephen. I've played a wide variety of roles across many different genres." "Have you though?" Colbert pressed, and now there was no mistaking the antagonistic tone. "I mean, angry guy with a gun, angry guy with a sword, angry guy on a plane full of snakes. It's all pretty much the same angry guy, isn't it?" The audience was dead silent now. This had gone from uncomfortable to openly hostile in a matter of seconds. Jackson sat back in his chair, his expression hardening as he processed what was happening. "That's incredibly reductive and frankly insulting," Jackson said, his voice still controlled, but with a new firmness. "I've spent decades building a career based on craft and dedication to the art of acting." Colbert shrugged as if Jackson's obvious offense was amusing to him. "I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. You show up, you shout some lines, you collect a paycheck. It's not exactly Daniel D-Lewis level commitment, is it?" "Excuse me." Jackson's voice dropped to that dangerous low register that anyone familiar with his work would recognize. "Are you seriously questioning my commitment to my profession right now?" "I'm just having a conversation," Colbert said with mock innocence, though his smirk betrayed his true intentions. "This is what we do here. We talk about things honestly." "Honestly?" Jackson leaned forward now, his patience clearly wearing thin. "You want to talk honestly? Let's talk about how you invited me here under the pretense of promoting my film, and instead you're sitting there trying to tear down my entire career for what? Entertainment value? Well, you have to admit it's more interesting than just plugging another action movie." Colbert shot back, and the arrogance in his voice was unmistakable. "Now, our audience is smart. They can see patterns." Jackson stared at him for a long moment, and you could feel the tension crackling through the studio. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every second of this train wreck in real time. "You know what's interesting to me, Stephen?" Jackson said, his voice deadly calm. "Now, what's interesting is how you think it's acceptable to disrespect a guest on your show like this. What's interesting is how you think being a talk show host gives you the right to judge someone else's life's work." Cor's smirk wavered slightly, but he pressed on. "Hey, I'm just asking the questions that matter. That's my job. Your job is supposed to be entertaining people, not humiliating your guests," Jackson replied, and there was steel in his voice now. "But I guess when you're not funny enough to do that on your own, you have to tear other people down to get a reaction." The studio audience gasped audibly at that response. Jackson had just delivered a devastating counterattack and Colbert's face showed he felt every word of it. Now wait just a minute. Colbert started, his composure cracking for the first time. I think you're overreacting to some harmless questions. Harmless. Jackson stood up from his chair and the power dynamic in the room shifted instantly. You call attacking my integrity and dismissing my life's work harmless. You call disrespecting me in front of millions of people harmless. Colbert looked genuinely rattled now, glancing nervously at his producers off camera. Samuel, let's just calm down and don't you dare tell me to calm down. Jackson cut him off, his voice rising for the first time. You started this. You wanted to play games with me, so let's play. The studio had never been quieter. Every person in that audience could feel the electricity in the air as Samuel L. Jackson stood towering over Stephen Core's desk, his eyes blazing with righteous anger. Core, for his part, looked like a man who had just realized he'd poked a sleeping dragon. Samuel, please let's just sit back down and have a civil conversation, Colbert stammered. But his voice had lost all its earlier smugness. The confident talk show host had been replaced by someone scrambling to regain control of a situation that was spiraling wildly out of hand. Civil, Jackson laughed, but there was no humor in it. You want to talk about civil now after you spent the last 5 minutes trying to humiliate me on national television? Where was civil when you decided to ambush me with your little character assassination? Colbert's hands were shaking slightly as he reached for his coffee mug, clearly buying time to think of his next move. Look, I think maybe you're misunderstanding my intentions here. I was just trying to have an engaging interview. Engaging? Jackson's voice boomed through the studio now and several audience members actually jumped in their seats. You call insulting my craft engaging. You call dismissing decades of hard work engaging. Let me tell you something about engaging, Stephen. What's engaging is respect. What's engaging is actually caring about your guests instead of using them as punching bags for your own ego. The cameras captured every moment as Colbert's face went through a range of emotions. Embarrassment, anger, panic. He clearly hadn't expected this level of pushback from Jackson, and he was drowning on live television. Now you're just being dramatic, Colbert said, trying to reclaim some authority, but his voice cracked slightly. I think you're taking this way too personally. Jackson leaned down, placing both hands on Colbert's desk, bringing himself eye level with the host. Too personally. This is my life we're talking about. This is my reputation. This is my legacy. How exactly should I be taking it? I mean, come on, Colbert said, and incredibly, he was still trying to justify his behavior. You have to admit that your range as an actor is well limited. I'm not saying anything that film critics haven't said. The audacity of that statement hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Jackson straightened up, shaking his head in disbelief. Film critics. You're hiding behind film critics. Now let me ask you something, Stephen. How many films have you made? How many characters have you brought to life? How many directors have called you back again and again because they trust your ability? Colbert opened his mouth to respond. But Jackson wasn't finished. Because I can tell you my numbers. I've appeared in over 150 films. I've worked with some of the greatest directors in cinema history. I've been nominated for an Academy Award. I've won multiple awards for my performances. And I've entertained millions of people around the world. What exactly have you done besides sit behind a desk and make jokes? The personal attack hit Core like a physical blow. His face flushed red, and for a moment, it looked like he might actually get up from his chair. That's completely out of line, he said, his voice tight with anger. Out of line? Jackson laughed again. And this time it was filled with genuine disbelief. You want to talk about out of line? You invited me here as your guest, and then you proceeded to attack everything I've worked for my entire life. You disrespected me. You disrespected my career. And you did it all with this smug little smile like you were doing everyone a favor. And now you want to tell me I'm out of line for defending myself. The studio audience was completely captivated. Now, this wasn't just an argument. It was a masterclass in someone standing up for themselves against a bully. And it was clear to everyone watching that Colbert had seriously underestimated who he was dealing with. I think we should take a commercial break, Colbert said weakly, looking desperately toward his producers. Oh no, Jackson said firmly. We're not taking any breaks. You wanted to have this conversation on television, so let's have it on television. You don't get to attack someone and then hide behind commercial breaks when they fight back. Colbert's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard. Samuel, I think you're blowing this way out of proportion. Am I? Let me ask the audience something, Jackson said, turning to face the crowd. Did what he said sound respectful to you? Did it sound like the kind of questions you ask someone you've invited to be your guest? The audience was dead silent, but their body language spoke volumes. They were leaning forward, hanging on every word, and it was obvious whose side they were on. You see, Stephen, here's the thing. Jackson continued, turning back to face his host. You thought you could use me as entertainment. You thought you could tear me down to build yourself up. But what you didn't count on was that I've been in this business long enough to recognize a cheap shot when I see one. It wasn't a cheap shot, Colbert protested, but his voice lacked conviction now. I was trying to ask legitimate questions about your career trajectory. Jackson stared at him for a long moment, then slowly shook his head. You know what the saddest part about this is? You actually had a chance to have a real conversation with me. You could have asked me about my process, about what drives me as an actor, about the challenges I've faced in this industry. You could have learned something. Your audience could have learned something. But instead, you chose to try to make me look small so you could feel big. The weight of those words settled over the studio like a heavy blanket. Even Colbert seemed to recognize the truth in what Jackson was saying, though his pride wouldn't let him admit it. "I still think you're overreacting," Colbert mumbled, but there was no fight left in his voice. "Overing?" Jackson repeated slowly. "Let me tell you what overreacting would be, Stephen. Overreacting would be me walking over there and showing you exactly how all those angry characters I play would handle this situation. What I'm doing right now is called standing up for myself with dignity and class, something you clearly know nothing about." Core flinched visibly at that, and several audience members actually gasped. The threat was subtle but unmistakable, and it was clear that Jackson was operating on a completely different level than his host. "No, I think we should definitely take a break," Colbert said, his voice barely above a whisper. "What's wrong, Stephen?" Jackson asked, and there was a dangerous smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Now, not so fun when you're the one being put on the spot, is it?" The silence in the studio was deafening. Stephen Colbert sat behind his desk, looking like a man who had just watched his career flash before his eyes. His hands were trembling slightly as he gripped his note cards, and beads of sweat were visible on his forehead under the hot studio lights. Samuel L. Jackson stood before him like a force of nature, completely in control of the situation that Core had so foolishly started. "You know what, Stephen?" Jackson said, his voice now carrying a calm authority that was somehow more intimidating than his earlier anger. "I've been thinking about what you said earlier, about me playing the same character over and over again. And you're right about one thing." Colbert looked up, hopefully perhaps thinking Jackson was about to back down or apologize. "Oh, I do play a certain type of character quite often," Jackson continued, pacing slowly in front of the desk. "I play men who don't take disrespect lying down. I play characters who stand up to bullies and cowards, men who have principles and aren't afraid to defend them. And you know what? I'm not acting right now, Stephen. This is just me." The audience was completely mesmerized. This wasn't just television anymore. This was real-life drama unfolding before their eyes, and everyone in that studio knew they were witnessing something extraordinary. "Samuel, please." Colbert tried one more time, his voice barely audible. "Can we please just move on and talk about your movie?" Jackson stopped pacing and turned to face him directly. "My movie? Now you want to talk about my movie after you spent the last 10 minutes tearing apart everything I've ever worked for? After you made it clear that you think my entire career is a joke? Now you want to give me the privilege of promoting my film on your show?" "I never said your career was a joke," Core protested weakly. "Didn't you?" Jackson's eyebrows raised. "Let me refresh your memory. You said I play the same character in every movie. You compared my work unfavorably to other actors. You suggested that I just show up, shout some lines, and collect a paycheck. You dismissed my craft, my dedication, and my talent. So, please explain to me how that's different from calling my career a joke." Core had no answer. He sat there opening and closing his mouth like a fish out of water, completely out of ammunition and ideas. "Here's what's really interesting to me," Jackson continued, his voice taking on an almost conversational tone that somehow made his words even more cutting. "You sit here night after night making jokes at other people's expense, thinking you're so clever, but when someone actually challenges you, when someone calls you out on your behavior, you fall apart. You want to dish it out, but you can't take it. That's not fair," Kohler managed to whisper. "Fair." Jackson's voice rose again, and the power in it filled every corner of the studio. "You want to talk about fair? Was it fair when you ambushed me with your little attack disguised as an interview? Was it fair when you tried to humiliate me in front of your audience?